When 27-year-old Wharton graduate Harrison Cole called me a Navy guy stuck in the past and terminated my position, he thought he was streamlining Apex Gulf Marine. He didn't know I'd owned the 45-acre deep-water dry dock facility beneath his fleet for 13 years. Apex Gulf Marine's glass-walled conference room on the third floor smelled of synthetic carpet and expensive cologne. Across the mahogany table, Harrison Cole had not raised his eyes from his laptop since I took a seat 20 minutes ago. Harrison was 27 years old, held an MBA from Wharton, wore a tailored navy suit with an open collar and designer white leather sneakers that cost more than my monthly truck payment. His gelled hair was losing its battle against the Texas coast humidity creeping through the HVAC vents. Through the glass panel behind him, I could see the real pulse of the operation. Across 45 acres of concrete and steel, my dry dock was humming with motion. A heavy crawler crane was swinging a prop assembly over the hull of the Coastal Ranger. Electric blue arcs flared from 3 welders working on the port quarter. Near the deep water channel, a twin-screw tugboat was easing a timber barge toward the outer bulkhead, its horn emitting a deep blast that rattled the glass panes. Down there, 40 skilled workers wearing hard hats moved with disciplined focus. Down there, 45 acres of deep water bay had been servicing commercial vessels for decades. That yard was alive. This room was a cold mausoleum. An executive assistant from Human Resources stood near the door, clutching an iPad against her jacket like a shield. She avoided eye contact completely. They always believed they understood how these termination proceedings were supposed to unfold. Harrison finally glanced up, his gaze hovering near my shirt collar. "Gordon, I will get straight to the point. Apex Gulf Marine is restructuring its physical operations to align with automated standards. We are entering into a strategic enterprise partnership with Cybermarine Systems out of Singapore for all primary fleet maintenance going forward." His delivery was smooth, rehearsed from corporate presentation decks. His voice carried that clipped tone taught in business schools to minimize human empathy during downsizings. "Your title as Director of Marine Operations is being eliminated as part of this strategic realignment. To be blunt, that dry dock facility down there is a capital sinkhole. It relies on outdated infrastructure. Modern commercial fleet operators do not require physical dry docks." Harrison continued, warming to his theme. "That is legacy thinking. Predictive maintenance powered by artificial intelligence and remote sensors is the future of maritime logistics. We are shifting to a lean global sourcing model." He paused, leaning forward to lock eyes with me for the first time. "You are a Navy guy stuck in the past, Gordon. You rely on grease, iron, and muscle memory. This is how we build a 21st century enterprise." I studied him in silence for 5 slow seconds. Then I turned my head to look through the window at the deep water dry dock below. 400 feet of reinforced basin, engineered to handle everything from shrimping trawlers to cargo vessels. I had hand-poured the concrete for those keel blocks in 2015. I had engineered and replaced the ballast pump matrix in 2019. I had overseen the structural re-welding of the main approach ramp in 2012. Every beam, hydraulic line, and valve carried my certification stamp. 23 heavy vessels in the Apex Gulf Marine Fleet depended on that single facility for structural repair, hull scrubbing, and mandatory Coast Guard maritime certification. Without access to that 45-acre footprint, those vessels could not legally clear harbor. "I understand," I said. Just those 2 words. Harrison's left eyebrow twitched faintly. He had prepared himself for a tense argument, a desperate plea for severance, or an angry speech. Instead, he received 2 quiet words and watched me pick up a plain manila folder from the chair beside me. The folder I had brought upstairs because I had foreseen this exact afternoon months in advance. I stood up smoothly, buttoned my canvas jacket, and walked out of the conference room. The assistant stepped back 3 feet as if I were carrying an unexploded shell. "My name is Gordon Vance. I am 49 years old. I served 6 years as a CB builder in the United States Navy Mobile Construction Battalion before joining Apex Gulf Marine 20 years ago. I started on the gravel lot as a structural welding supervisor and worked my way through every position in that yard. Everything I know about heavy marine construction, offshore rig fabrication, underwater metal fatigue, and hurricane-proof welding I learned with burnt gloves, cutting torches, or by studying technical manuals in break rooms during long night shifts. Apex Gulf Marine hired me at age 29 because I was the only certified diver and welder on the coast who answered a 2 o'clock in the morning emergency call regarding structural beam failure on their offshore rig during Hurricane Rita. I drove 70 miles through gale force rain, set up diesel work lights on a pitching deck in 40-knot winds, and executed emergency welds that held the platform stable until permanent repairs were completed at dawn. The regional vice president called the company founder at 6 in the morning. Put Gordon Vance on permanent payroll before another maritime firm snaps him up. Every promotion over the next 2 decades followed that exact pattern. Supervisor to foreman, foreman to superintendent, superintendent to assistant director, and assistant director to director of marine operations. I am the lead certified offshore platform and dry dock inspector on the upper Gulf Coast. In 20 years of continuous operation, not a single structure or vessel hull under my supervision ever failed a Coast Guard safety inspection. Not one. When I first took control of the dry dock in 2003, the yard was an abandoned disaster area. The previous corporate tenant had collapsed into bankruptcy following severe storm surges in 2008. They could not cover structural repairs, could not retain certified welders, and let their operating licenses lapse. The 45-acre facility had sat dormant for 2 straight years. Red rust covered every gantry crane, main ballast pumps were seized solid with mud, and concrete keel blocks were fractured from neglect. Over a decade, I transformed that ruined acreage into the premier commercial marine maintenance center on the upper Texas coast. Deepwater access channel cleared to 38 feet, heavy fabrication shops equipped with 40-ton overhead gantry cranes that I designed and anchored myself, an inventory warehouse stocked with components for every vessel class in the fleet, and an emergency fuel farm with direct pipeline access so our ships never faced fuel delays. 27 commercial vessels relied exclusively on that single 45-acre parcel. Every emergency hull patch, propeller shaft alignment, and Coast Guard recertification ran through my yard crew. When Hurricane Harvey struck in 2017, our facility was the only operational deep-water dry dock between New Orleans and Corpus Christi capable of servicing emergency rescue tugs and supply vessels. That dedication came at a personal cost. Last October, my son Lucas was starting at linebacker for his senior high school homecoming football game. It was his final season under the Friday night stadium lights before graduation. I had that date circled in red marker on my calendar for 4 months. My wife Sarah had arranged her schedule as an administrator at Galveston Independent School District so we could walk onto the field together for senior parent night. Then, at 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon, the commercial vessel Gulf Trader limped into the channel with a fractured tail shaft and active water ingress in the engine compartment. An emergency dry docking situation. If we did not float her onto the keel blocks immediately, she would settle into the mud channel and block the entire harbor fairway. I had no choice. I pulled on my rubber boots and stayed at the dock. Sarah recorded the entire game from the bleachers using her smartphone. My wife, a brilliant school administrator who had married a shipyard welder 22 years ago and supported every promotion while raising our son, stood in the cold coastal wind holding that phone steady for 2.5 hours so I would not miss a single play. Lucas intercepted a pass in the 3rd quarter, picked off the ball at the 40-yard line, and broke 3 tackles to run it back 60 yards for a touchdown. I watched that video clip in my office at 2 o'clock at night, sitting alone in my coveralls, smelling of hydraulic fluid, diesel exhaust, and cutting torch smoke. I watched Lucas cross that goal line 9 times in a row. I have missed more of Lucas's athletic games than I care to admit. The yard always demanded my presence, or at least that was the justification I repeated to myself. There was always an urgent hull leak, a failed inspection, or a vessel captain requesting my personal oversight. Sarah never complained, never issued ultimatums, and never forced me to choose between the yard and my family. She understood that my labor was not simply a paycheck. It was my way of building a foundation for our family's future. Sarah is the precise reason I am far more than a Navy veteran with a corporate job. She is the reason I owned the very ground Harrison Cole had just fired me from. The story of how I came to own 45 acres of industrial waterfront began in 2010. The commercial marine firm that originally held title to the dry dock collapsed under federal bankruptcy proceedings following the Deepwater Horizon disaster. Environmental liabilities, insurance disputes, and contractor defaults crippled maritime service providers across the region. The federal bankruptcy trustee placed the entire 45-acre industrial parcel up for court-supervised public auction. I had monitored that court auction docket for 4 months. I knew the intrinsic value of 40 fair 5 acres of prime waterfront featuring a deep water berth on the Texas coast. More importantly, I understood what that property meant to Apex Gulf Marine. Corporate executives had been leasing the yard for years on a short-term commercial agreement, but they never attempted to purchase the real estate outright. That was classic corporate short-term financial thinking. Why carry real estate assets on a balance sheet when you can classify monthly lease payments as routine operating expenses? On a cool Tuesday evening in November 2010, I met with Douglas Bennett. Douglas was 61 years old, a veteran maritime attorney operating out of a historic 2-room office near the Galveston Historic District. His office featured a brass ceiling fan that hummed softly above stacks of Admiralty law reporters and land title books. Douglas had handled our first home purchase 20 years earlier, a modest 3-bedroom brick house off Highway 146 that Sarah and I bought when Lucas was born. Douglas was a meticulous attorney who kept physical copies of every document in fireproof steel cabinets and never raised his voice because his legal drafting was airtight. "Douglas," I said as I sat across from his oak desk, "I intend to purchase the marine maintenance facility at the bankruptcy auction." Douglas lowered his reading glasses and evaluated me in silence for 10 long seconds. "Gordon, that is a 45-acre commercial industrial property with deep water access. The opening bid at auction will exceed $900,000. Are you fully aware of the financial exposure?" "I have managed that facility for Apex Gulf Marine for 12 years, I replied calmly. "I know every buried high-voltage line, concrete pillar, seawall tieback, and gallon of pump capacity. I know what that land is worth today, and I know what it will be worth tomorrow." The following week, Douglas established Coastal Marine Assets LLC as a legal entity registered under state business law, listing me as sole managing member. He carefully structured the corporate entity, liability indemnifications, and tax structures. Crucially, Douglas verified that my personal acquisition of commercial real estate through an independent limited liability company did not violate any conflict of interest covenants or non-compete clauses within my employment contract at Apex Gulf Marine. As my job description was strictly operational management, not real estate procurement, I liquidated my entire personal savings of $280,000. Every dollar I had saved since enlisting in the Navy at age 18, including hazard pay from overseas deployments, re-enlistment incentives, and 20 years of frugal living. Sarah and I took out a secondary mortgage on our home to secure the remaining capital requirement. The evening before I signed loan agreements, Sarah and I sat at our kitchen table, reviewing financial projections line by line. Personal risk was staggering. If the bankruptcy auction went wrong, if concealed environmental liabilities emerged, or if market rates plummeted, we faced complete financial ruin. "How much capital do we need to commit?" Sarah asked softly, looking over bank disclosures spread across the table. $320,000 in liquid equity plus closing costs, I answered. Sarah looked at the property map, looked at the balance sheet, and then looked directly into my eyes. "Then let us do it," she said without hesitation. No speeches about financial caution, no demands for guaranteed safety, just absolute trust in a shared decision. Sarah had always possessed that rare vision. While I focused on structural welds and pump mechanics, she understood long-term stability and land ownership. The public auction occurred on a crisp Thursday morning in December 2010 at the Galveston County Courthouse. I wore my dark gray navy blazer, the one I had worn to my father's memorial service 3 years prior. Douglas sat beside me, carrying a briefcase packed with certified bank drafts, corporate filings, and bidding authorizations. 6 competing bidders filled the gallery. 2 commercial development groups from Houston, an environmental remediation corporation, and 3 private investors. The court auctioneer opened bidding at $500,000. The price advanced rapidly to $750,000, then $800,000. Bidders dropped out one by one as the price climbed past $900,000. At $950,000, only 2 parties remained active: Coastal Marine Assets LLC and a corporate development firm from Dallas that intended to redevelop the waterfront into condominiums. The Dallas representative called out $975,000. I glanced at Douglas. He gave me a single firm nod. $1 million, I announced clearly. The Dallas representative closed his binder, shook his head, and stood up. Sold to bidder number 7 for $1 million, the auctioneer declared, striking his wooden gavel. A total purchase price of $1 million for 45 acres of prime commercial waterfront, including a deep-water dry dock facility that had cost $28 million to construct originally. It was the most valuable real estate transaction executed on that stretch of the Texas coast that decade, and not a single executive at Apex Gulf Marine noticed, because Gordon Vance did not fit their mental profile of a land developer. The title transfer required 6 weeks of administrative verification, title searches, environmental soil testing, survey verifications, and insurance filings. Douglas executed every legal step seamlessly while I continued showing up at Apex Gulf Marine at 5:30 every morning to manage the dry dock I now legally owned. The professional irony was profound. Apex Gulf Marine was paying monthly commercial lease checks to Coastal Marine Assets LLC, which were deposited into my corporate account. To their accounting department, Coastal Marine Assets LLC was merely a vendor line item in the annual operational budget. However, Douglas had insisted on inserting a specific, non-negotiable legal clause into the commercial ground lease agreement executed between Coastal Marine Assets LLC as lessor and Apex Gulf Marine as lessee. Section 6.4, embedded on page 14 of a 22-page commercial contract, read as follows. In the event the lessee terminates the employment of any individual who is a managing member or beneficial owner of the lessor entity due to discriminatory practices, age bias, or military status discrimination, the lessor retains the absolute right to terminate this ground lease upon 14 calendar days written notice, whereupon all liquidated penalty provisions specified under Section 19.6 shall immediately apply. I had paused when Douglas read that paragraph to me in his office. What are the specific penalties under Section 19.6? I asked. Holdover damages calculated at 300% of standard monthly commercial rent, full legal fee indemnifications, and loss of use compensation calculated against replacement facility rates across the regional market, Douglas explained calmly. Sign it, Gordon. You will likely never need to enforce it, because corporate executives rarely examine ground leases once established, but leave it written in stone regardless. The lease agreement was signed in February 2011 by Apex Gulf Marine's former chief financial officer, who held full corporate authority. That lease had remained legally binding and enforceable for 13 consecutive years. No modern executive in the current corporate hierarchy had ever read Section 6.4. Why would they? Monthly lease payments transferred automatically, the dry dock operated flawlessly, and the director who ran the facility arrived before sunrise and departed long after dark. Corporate managers never inspect the foundation when the roof is not leaking. The manila folder I carried out of Harrison Cole's conference room contained my original certified copy of that ground lease agreement. I had brought it to the termination meeting because I had received early warning of my dismissal 3 days prior. On Monday night at 11:15, Oscar Reyes sent me a text message. Oscar was my senior yard foreman, an 18-year veteran of the facility who had started under my supervision as a rigger and advanced to oversee daily dry dock operations. Oscar was a broad-shouldered, sun-baked maritime worker with calloused hands and a quiet demeanor. He was a man who said very little but noticed every detail on the dock. His text message contained 7 words. Emergency Executive HR Meeting, Thursday afternoon. Watch your back. I read the message while sitting on the edge of our bed. Sarah was sleeping soundly. Our dog raised his head from the floor rug and watched me with intelligent eyes. I walked into the hallway, opened the heavy fireproof steel safe bolted inside our closet, and retrieved the original document folder. Inside sat the original county deed, bearing the Galveston County seal, Coastal Marine Assets LLC corporate filings, executed ground lease, my honorable discharge papers from the United States Navy, and a framed photograph of my sea battalion taken in Okinawa in 1996. 22 young men in hard hats, building airfield structures thousands of miles from home. I placed the ground lease into the manila folder, set it on the hallway table next to my truck keys, and went back to sleep. Once you accept that corporate betrayal is inevitable, clarity replaces anxiety. Walking out of the Apex Gulf Marine corporate building that Thursday afternoon, I crossed the concrete staging yard for the final time as an employee. Word of my termination had moved across the yard like a sea breeze. The crew had seen me enter the executive building at 2 o'clock wearing my dark jacket and emerge 20 minutes later holding a manila folder. As I walked down the central crane aisle, work ground to a complete halt. A welder on the Coastal Ranger killed his arc torch, flipped up his dark welding helmet, and stood silently on scaffolding, watching me pass. Near the main entrance gate, Oscar Reyes stood with his heavy arms crossed over his chest, his jaw set firmly. He had been my trusted second-in-command for 18 years. We stood 3 feet apart and locked eyes for 10 seconds. Neither of us spoke a word. No words were necessary between men who had worked side by side through 2 major hurricanes and hundreds of emergency repairs. I paused at the perimeter gate and turned around to look at the yard one last time. 400 feet of deep-water dry dock extending into the coastal channel. 40-ton overhead gantry cranes I had retrofitted and certified. Concrete keel blocks I had poured and leveled to millimeter precision. High-capacity fuel farm humming softly as it supplied diesel to 23 commercial vessels. Heavy fabrication bays where my crew produced structural repairs that passed Coast Guard safety standards without a single failure. My dry dock, my land, my corporate deed recorded at the Galveston County Courthouse for 13 years. I allowed myself a faint smile, climbed into my white Ford F-250 pickup truck, showing rust along rocker panels from years of salty ocean air and carrying 180,000 miles on the odometer, placed the manila folder on the passenger seat, and drove out of the gate. Harrison Cole had just terminated the individual who owned the very ground beneath his office. He simply had not bothered to check the land registry. The following morning, Friday at 8 o'clock, Harrison issued a company-wide email broadcast. Oscar forwarded a screenshot to my phone without adding text. Team, an exciting new chapter begins today for Apex Gulf Marine. We are embracing the future of commercial maritime operations through our strategic partnership with Cybermarine Systems. This innovative automated model will reduce operational overhead by 35% while positioning our enterprise as a leader in digital maritime logistics. We are moving decisively past legacy physical infrastructure to build a modern business platform. Additional details regarding our digital transition roadmap will follow. Harrison Cole, Chief Executive Officer, he had copied the board of directors on the email and published the announcement to the company's corporate media profile alongside buzzwords about innovation and strategic disruption. By noon that same Friday, Harrison had physically moved his personal belongings into my former office overlooking the dry dock. Oscar informed me later that afternoon that Harrison had immediately instructed facility maintenance staff to remove every framed photograph I had hung over 20 years. Crew photos from complex vessel salvage operations, Coast Guard commendation plaques earned during Hurricane Harvey emergency relief, structural completion certificates, and the photo of my Navy Seabee unit. 20 years of documented maritime achievement, cleared off walls and dumped into cardboard boxes in the hallway like disposable trash. Harrison replaced those historic photos with a dry erase whiteboard, wrote Innovation Pipeline across the top in blue marker, and drew 3 empty vertical columns underneath. He left the columns blank, awaiting digital inspiration. That Friday evening at 7:30, my phone rang. It was Oscar calling from his truck. "Are you in a position to speak, Gordon?" he asked, his voice tight with suppressed anger. I sat at our kitchen table, reviewing financial documents while Sarah finished preparing dinner. Speak freely. Oscar. I was standing outside your old office an hour ago delivering weekend safety logs, Oscar said. The office door was cracked open 6 inches. Harrison was on a speakerphone call with a principal board member, laughing loudly. He told the board member, "The old guy acted as if I were destroying his lifetime legacy. It is a dry dock, not sacred architecture. He is just a Navy guy who never evolved past the 1990s. Nobody in modern business is going to miss diesel smoke and dirty coveralls." This is what modern corporate management looks like. Silence hung over the phone line for several seconds, broken only by the hum of our refrigerator. Oscar continued. Harrison then said that by next quarter, automated software algorithms and remote sensors would run the entire maritime operation without needing manual oversight. He said military veterans never grasp that physical experience is not equivalent to digital innovation. I listened quietly, letting Harrison's words settle in my mind. "Thank you for informing me, Oscar," I said evenly. "I thought you deserved to know the exact character of the executive running this enterprise," Oscar replied before ending the call. I set the phone on the table. Sarah stopped her work at the counter and looked at me with that calm expression she wore whenever a major turning point arrived. "He believes you are defeated," I said. "Are you?" Sarah asked softly. I looked at the manila folder resting on the counter where Douglas Bennett's business card was clipped to the front of the 13-year-old ground lease agreement. "Not even close," I answered. On Monday morning at 7:15, I parked my truck at Clear Lake Marina. The morning was clear and quiet, filled with the sharp scent of salt air. I dialed Douglas Bennett's direct line. He answered on the second ring, as he had every morning for 30 years. "Douglas, Harrison Cole formally terminated my employment on Thursday afternoon, citing my military background and calling me a Navy guy, stuck in the past in the presence of HR staff." Douglas listened without interrupting. "Section 6.4, he stated calmly, military status and age-biased discrimination triggers immediate lease termination. I will have the formal notice of lease termination drafted and hand-delivered to Apex Gulf Marine's legal department before noon today via certified courier. 14 calendar days, Gordon. That is the explicit remedy period under the ground lease. One additional directive, Douglas," I added. "Contact Pacific Gulf Maritime in Houston. Inform their executive team that I am ready to evaluate their long-standing proposal for an exclusive facility lease, fleet servicing agreement, and my appointment as Vice President of Maritime Operations. Inform them I can deliver immediate operational access to a certified deep-water, dry dock facility equipped with an elite maintenance crew. I will initiate that transaction immediately," Douglas replied. By 11:30 that morning, a legal courier walked into the corporate lobby of Apex Gulf Marine, carrying a sealed legal envelope from the law offices of Douglas T. Bennett, Admiralty and Real Estate Counsel, Galveston, Texas. The clerk logged delivery and forwarded the package to the legal department. It landed on the desk of Evelyn Hayes at 11:45. Evelyn was Apex Gulf Marine's general counsel, 44 years old, highly analytical, and completely detached from the Cole family corporate dynasty. She was a precise attorney who read every sentence of every legal filing. Because she understood that unread fine print destroys corporations. She opened the envelope and read the notice twice. Formal ground lease termination notice from Coastal Marine Assets, LLC, invoking Section 6.4 of the ground lease agreement, effective in 14 calendar days. Attached was a certified certificate of good standing from the Texas Secretary of State, listing Gordon Vance as managing member of Coastal Marine Assets, LLC, alongside a certified copy of the property deed recorded at the Galveston County Courthouse. Evelyn did not recognize Coastal Marine Assets, LLC initially, assuming it was a vendor dispute. She ordered original corporate real estate files from deep storage, a thick paper file that had sat untouched for 13 years. She pulled the master lease agreement and turned to page 14, section 6.4. She read the clause once, read it a second time, and traced each word with her pen. She opened her computer terminal, accessed the Texas Secretary of State Business Database, and searched for Coastal Marine Assets, LLC. The filing loaded instantly. Managing member, Gordon Vance. Registered agent, Douglas T. Bennett, Galveston, Texas. Evelyn Hayes sat motionless for 2 minutes. The black text on her monitor was indisputable. Gordon Vance, the senior executive whom Harrison Cole had dismissed 48 hours earlier for being stuck in the past, was sole legal owner of the 45-acre industrial parcel beneath their feet. She turned to page 19, section 19.6, penalty provisions for default and unlawful holdover. She calculated financial liabilities twice on her desk calculator. Holdover rent damages set at 300% of market rates, full legal fee indemnifications, and loss of use compensation tied to replacement facility displacement costs. Contractual penalties totaled $8,500,000. That penalty figure did not include the catastrophic cost of redirecting 23 commercial vessels to external dry docks. She picked up her phone and dialed Harrison Cole's private line. "Harrison, we have an emergency in the legal department," Evelyn said, her voice flat. "The marine maintenance facility. We do not own the property. We have been leasing the land for 13 years under a commercial ground lease, and the property owner has just served us with a 14-day eviction notice." Harrison laughed softly over the line. "Then renew the lease, Evelyn. Pay whatever small increase they are asking. The property owner is Gordon Vance," Evelyn stated coldly, "and he is terminating the lease specifically because you fired him." The emergency executive session of the board of directors convened at 4:30 that afternoon in the main conference room. Harrison Cole sat at the head of the mahogany table, his whiteboard visible through the glass partition showing its 3 empty columns under Innovation Pipeline. Evelyn Hayes stood at the far end of the table, displaying land title deeds and lease contracts. Through the speakerphone came the stern voice of the company founder, Harrison's grandfather, calling from Scottsdale, Arizona. "Evelyn, explain the legal situation precisely," the founder commanded. Evelyn presented facts without emotion. Corporate ownership structure of Coastal Marine Assets LLC, explicit terms of Section 6.4, mandatory 14-day notice window, and detailed calculation of Section 19.6 penalties. Gordon Vance owns the entire 45-acre footprint, including the dry dock, repair bays, fuel farm, and access channel, Evelyn explained. The ground lease contains a specific termination clause triggered if Mr. Vance's employment is terminated under discriminatory conditions. Apex Gulf Marine has exactly 11 days remaining to vacate the property or face immediate federal holdover litigation. Harrison's face flushed deep red before fading to pale white. "There must be a legal challenge we can file," he asserted loudly. "He was an employee. An employee cannot secretly own company infrastructure." Evelyn looked at Harrison with disappointment. "He does not own company infrastructure, Harrison. He owns his private real estate. We are merely commercial tenants. And we just lost our lease because you fired our landlord without reviewing property contracts. Then we will lease another dry dock facility in the area." Harrison countered, his voice rising. "The nearest commercial dry dock facility with deep water clearance and Coast Guard certification is located in Mobile, Alabama." Evelyn replied calmly, "That is 280 miles away. They currently maintain a 9-month waiting list for routine maintenance and a minimum 6-week delay for emergency dry docking. Our commercial fleet contracts require mandatory monthly Coast Guard inspections. Without access to Gordon Vance's yard, our 23 commercial vessels will be legally grounded by federal maritime authorities within 2 weeks." The conference room fell into total silence. On the corporate screen, Harrison's public announcement boasting about digital transformation was still pinned to the top of his page. The founder's voice came through the speakerphone, sharp and cutting. "Harrison, what have you done to this company?" Harrison opened his mouth to reply, but no sound came out. "Leave the room, Harrison," the founder ordered quietly. Harrison stood up slowly, adjusted his tailored suit jacket, and walked out of the conference room. His white leather sneakers squeaked softly against the polished concrete floor, a small sound echoing through the hall of a dying corporate enterprise. 3 days later, I sat in Douglas Bennett's Galveston office to finalize an exclusive commercial facility lease and service contract with Pacific Gulf Maritime. The The chief executive officer of Pacific Gulf Maritime had flown down from Houston personally, accompanied by his head of maritime operations. The agreement was comprehensive. A $47 million, five-year exclusive facility lease, an operational agreement granting Pacific Gulf Maritime exclusive rights to the 45-acre dry dock facility. I was officially named Vice President of Maritime Operations, overseeing all vessel maintenance, engineering overhauls, and Coast Guard compliance for their fleet of 31 commercial vessels. The contract contained a strict exclusivity covenant. No Apex Gulf Marine vessels would be permitted entry onto the property under any circumstances. The Pacific Pioneer, a 380-foot commercial container vessel scheduled for major hull overhaul, was the first ship to enter my dry dock under the new corporate arrangement. My yard crew guided her through the channel at sunrise. On a crisp Thursday morning, exactly 10 days after Harrison Cole had terminated my position, Oscar Reyes directed docking maneuvers from the seawall, issuing commands over the radio network in the steady, experienced voice I had relied on for 18 years. Electric ballast pumps evacuated seawater from the basin. High-density concrete keel blocks settled firmly under the ship's keel. Within an hour, 20 arc welders were working along the hull, their blue welding flashes illuminating morning mist. My dry dock was operating at full capacity once again, just under a completely different corporate banner. At 8:15 on the following Tuesday morning, Harrison Cole's black BMW pulled into the visitor parking lot outside my dry dock office. I watched him from the elevated crane walkway where I was inspecting the Pacific Pioneer's twin propellers. He stepped out of his vehicle alone. No corporate attorneys, no HR assistants, no executive entourage. He walked slowly across the crushed granite driveway toward the dry dock, looking diminished and exhausted. The arrogance had vanished entirely, replaced by the hollow expression of a man who had confronted reality too late. We met near the high-capacity fuel farm. The air was rich with the scent of diesel fuel, salt water, and cutting torches slicing through structural steel. "Gordon, I made a catastrophic mistake," Harrison said quietly, his eyes fixed on the ground before looking up at me. "The board of directors voted to remove me as chief executive officer yesterday afternoon. I am here personally to request a commercial sublease for Apex Gulf Marine. Any financial terms you specify. We will pay double the market rate." I looked at him for several quiet seconds, this young man who had dismissed 20 years of hands-on technical knowledge as legacy thinking and called me a Navy guy stuck in the past. "I would assist you if it were legally possible, Harrison," I replied evenly. "But our exclusive commercial contract with Pacific Gulf Maritime legally prohibits Apex Gulf Marine vessels from accessing this facility. Your strategic digital transformation freed me to execute that contract." Harrison nodded slowly, accepting finality. "You were the most vital asset this enterprise possessed," he admitted softly. "I was simply too arrogant to recognize it." He stood there for another minute, looking out over the thriving dry dock, the Pacific Pioneer resting securely in the basin, my crew moving with disciplined efficiency, overhead gantry cranes swinging heavy steel beams into place. The yard was vibrant, powerful, and profitable, but Apex Gulf Marine had no share in its future. He turned around, walked back to his car, and drove away into morning traffic. Within 6 weeks of losing access to the 45-acre facility, Apex Gulf Marine's entire business model collapsed under legal and financial pressure. Unable to secure Coast Guard safety recertifications, their 23 commercial vessels were formally grounded by federal maritime authorities. Marine insurance underwriters canceled coverage due to operational risk. Major commercial shipping clients immediately terminated logistics contracts and transferred business to Pacific Gulf Maritime, which possessed the dry dock, certified crew, and executive leadership to deliver results. Apex Gulf Marine, an enterprise established by Harrison's grandfather 52 years earlier, was forced into liquidation, selling its grounded vessel fleet at auction for 28 cents on the dollar. Coastal Marine Assets LLC collected $8,500,000 in contractual lease penalties alongside the lucrative $47 million Pacific Gulf Maritime Agreement. I completely paid off the mortgage on our family home, fully funded Lucas's 4-year college education fund, and purchased Sarah the custom luxury SUV she had quietly admired for years, but never requested after 2 decades of standing faithfully beside a man who worked long hours in dirty coveralls. On a warm Friday evening in late September, golden sunlight reflected off calm waters of the bay. I sat in my Ford F-250 pickup truck parked at the edge of the seawall, watching my crew wrap up their Friday shifts. Below us, the Pacific Pioneer rested in the dry dock with fresh marine paint gleaming along her hull, fully certified and ready to clear harbor at sunrise. My mobile phone vibrated on the dashboard. I picked it up to see Lucas calling Dad. "Are you going to make it to the stadium for kickoff tonight?" Lucas asked. "I am sitting in front row seats right behind the team bench." "Son," I replied with a smile, "I promised you I would be there." "You said that before, Dad," Lucas teased. Though his tone carried genuine excitement, "This time is different, Lucas. The yard is running smoothly, and I own the land." He laughed and hung up. I turned the ignition key, shifted the truck into drive, and backed away from the water. In my rearview mirror, the Gulf of Mexico stretched vast and blue beyond the 45-acre deep-water facility I had owned for 13 years and managed for 20. Some men attempt to construct business empires using corporate presentation decks, automated algorithms, and superficial buzzwords. I built mine on 45 acres of concrete, steel, and saltwater, backed by the enduring truth that true value rests in hands-on expertise, physical land ownership, and legal foresight that outlasts corporate arrogance. If anyone ever attempts to label your experience as outdated, remember that real expertise always owns the foundation in the end.